Hello and welcome to the Music Minds podcast. I'm Tony Fennell and joining me as always is my co-host John Stone. How are you, John?
Hey, Tony. It's one of those days.
Oh, please. Whether Subway, New York, life in general?
Period.
Well, let's try and put a bit of humour back into both of our lives.
Good.
Today's show is called Who Needs More Than Four? There's an old joke that goes, what's the difference between a rock guitarist and a jazz guitarist?
What?
The answer? A rock guitarist plays 3 chords to 1 million people. A jazz guitarist plays 1 million chords to 3 people.
Oh, my.
Sorry about that. No, it's terrible. It's not actually true, but pretty funny either way. Well, The conundrum we're looking at today is that some of the biggest hits of all time were written with 4 chords. So, knowing these 4 chords, we should all be able to churn out hit after hit after hit. Right, John?
One would think, right?
Well, one would think. Listen, and by the way, if you don't believe me with regards to the 4-chord hit, you got to check out the 4-chord song by Australian comedy rock band Axis of Awesome on YouTube. I got to tell you, it is hilarious and it is spot on, right in the money. Pretty funny, huh?
It was very funny.
Oh, it's brilliant. Anyway, these 4 chords, if it was in the key of C major, would correspond to C, G, A minor, and F. Don't believe me? Well, here's a few of the hits that have used this exact chord progression. Journey, Don't Stop Believing. Mm-hmm. James Blunt, You're Beautiful. Black Eyed Peas, Where Is the Love? Mm-hmm. Alphaville, Forever Young.
Oh, wow.
Jason Mraz, I'm Yours. Train, Hey Soul Sister. Oh, Jesus Christ. Oh, this was a bit of a big...
Right,
this is a bit of this is a bit of a big hit. The Beatles, Let It Be.
That works.
Elton John, Can You Feel the Love Tonight? Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Akon, Don't Matter. John Denver, Take Me Home, Country Roads. Lady Gaga, Paparazzi. U2, With or Without You. Bob Marley, No Woman, No Cry. I could be here all night, but that is an impressive list to say the least, right?
Not bad. There's a few records sold.
Well, mate, I was trying to find a way to explain to the listening audience how the use of the same chord progression doesn't exactly mean that it's going to be the exact same song for every writer that uses these chords. And here's what I came up with, mate. Writing songs using this progression is like someone learning how to paint. He or she may use the same colors, lines, shapes, and sizes as other artists, but it's their interpretation and the way they use the materials and their style, of course, that will differentiate one piece of art to another. Not bad, right?
Sure, very good.
Right. But, it's the same thing when it comes to writing songs. Even though the chord progression is the same, the instruments, beat, tempo, and lyrics and vocals are invariably different. Well, I say that, John. I'm saying this to you. There have been numerous lawsuits brought by artists claiming that their song has been pilfered, but we'll leave that for another episode. And I think we've covered that once or twice.
I think we've talked about that, haven't we?
I think we have, right? Keep in mind that those songs that I mentioned earlier are the cream of the crop when it comes to the use of the 4-chord progression. And many of the recent versions, the new pop songs using the same trick are short-lived and end up being parked on an iTunes playlist. That's the truth of the matter. But those same 4 chords, they're going to be used again and again. And they'll be used right now. Right now, mate, there's a writer, I'll guarantee, knocking out a hit using the tried and tested C, G, A minor, and F pattern. Right as we do this podcast, he sat there going, "Oh, I've got a hit."
I was just going to say, and he thinks he discovered it himself.
Well, he did, didn't he? Oh no, sorry. Look, you deal with songs all day, in and out, mate. What's your take on this?
Well, it's really interesting when you brought this up as a subject, because I didn't realize that. And you always think, oh, it's always some variation on a theme, or all of these songs come from a unique place, so to speak. But sure, and to your analogy of painting, you can take that one step further and say you can have the Mona Lisa and you can have a paint by numbers version of the Mona Lisa. You're going to be able to tell the difference. And
wow, that's a great analogy, my friend.
What makes the Mona Lisa isn't the numbers you pick and the colors that you're told to use. It is what made that, or any great painting that you could imagine. So here, yes, absolutely, you're starting out with a progression. It makes sense to the listener. It makes sense. It's going to be a good bed for whatever you want to put on it as far as your melody is concerned. But as we know in copyright, you can't copyright a chord progression. You can copyright a melody, you can copyright lyrics, and you can copyright certain unique elements of a specific song, a bass line, something like that. An example we always use is the bass line from Money, the Pink Floyd song. But, when it comes to a chord progression, it would make total sense. And what that list you described, that was across the spectrum. You're talking about some jazz, you're talking about rock, you're talking about reggae, you're talking about everything, and not insignificant songs. So clearly there's a root there that makes sense to the ear, both of the educated and uneducated, let's just say, listener. And it really makes a lot of sense. But when you brought this to me, I said, boy, this is really interesting, because it kind of gets you into the whole mindset of what makes a great song. And yes, of course, you got to have a chord progression that makes sense, and obviously that one makes the most sense for a lot of people. But as you said, you can, there are a million songs. I mean, that list you gave, and probably 100 more, let's say, of good, good selling songs, high volume sales and such. You've got 10 million more, I'm sure, that have never gone anywhere because they didn't know what to do with those 4 chords. And again, the painting analogy, sure, you can have all the paint brushes and all the beautiful paints and a high quality canvas and everything, and do all that right. If you don't got that skill, it doesn't matter,
And you can give an artist as many pots of paint as you want. If he can't paint, he can't paint.
Right.
You know what I mean?
No.
It's like, and the other thing is, with the amount of software that's available, and we've touched on this a few times before in some of our earlier podcasts, the amount of software that's available that you can literally plug in and play. You can, there's arpeggiators going down. You're like, oh, here we go. And you're out. So, there should be a hit every second, and there isn't. There isn't. You've got to have the ear, mate. You've got to have it.
Yeah, it's very funny. This guy that I did some work with, he's a filmmaker, and he came up with this idea. The basis of it was that a computer program was created that would basically take every chord, every conceivable progression, every conceivable note combination and stuff, and through algorithms, that word again, the A word, would create every conceivable song that you could think of over the course of time. And I was just like, that wouldn't work. But, sure, because it's a math problem, right? We're talking about, you've got your scale, you've got your octaves, you've got your halftones, all of that. Everything is there to build a song or build a progression, chord progression or whatnot. But you got to have that let's just say human element. You've got to have that skill, that talent that can look at something. And I think back to the Rolling Stones when they were first coming out. They were just playing covers, and they were doing their thing, and they were very popular in the UK, and everybody was following them, and the girls were screaming and running on stage and all sorts of things. But they didn't have their own songs, and their manager at the time, I guess, was that Andrew Loog Oldham, or was it?
Yeah, it was.
Andrew Loog Oldham said, "You guys have to write your own songs, locking them in a room and making them figure it out," and they did, and that talent is recognizing music that's out there and seeing into it a little bit, I think, in my mind. None of it, we're all doing some variation or derivation of something that came before. I mean, that's just impossible, to not do it by this point, because, I would argue that if not every song, most songs have already been written. So we're doing some version of them or some variation, but that unique spark that we all have as a creator, as a songwriter, that's what's going to make it different and special, even if, sure, and as we've talked about, Tony, with Ed Sheeran and some of the other big hit makers these days, they're borrowing, as you say, tipping a hat to an older track or something, sometimes a little more egregiously, sometimes a little more creatively, but at some point, you're going to touch something that's already been out there, but how you interpret it and take it in and, push it back out, that's what's going to make it unique. And that requires that skill that, it's not just 4 chords that you can throw out there and say, okay, I have a hit now.
And I totally and utterly agree with you, but you've got to look at these hit makers. And actually, Andrew Loog Oldham was the original Simon Cowell. He could go in and go, I know what it needs. I know exactly what it needs. Not the greatest looking band on earth. I mean, Brian Jones was probably the best looking guy in the band, and he bleeding died. But I mean, it was like, oh, Jesus, the good looking one's gone. Come on.
We're screwed.
Now what? But which is interesting. But, you look at the original Stones and Oldham. He sat in the room just as you said, and he turned around and he went, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to be the Antichrist. We are going to be the anti-Beatles. Let those guys with the fluff, and we're going to be the dangerous guys on the right hand side, coming in from the rear, so to speak, and smashing down the doors. Now, Simon Cowell has taken that, and what he does is he gets the hit makers in, and he goes, I've just given you a really good looking kid who's got a decent voice, or an average looking kid with an insane voice, and I need hits. And basically what he will do is he will put it out to tender and say, bring it on. And they write generic killer pop tunes.
Right.
And basically he has a list as far as you get, that you're going to get, unfortunately, this is how it works. If you get one of those guys, one of the winners of X Factor or America's Got Talent or whatever, and you get them to record your song, enjoy that one song, because that'll be it. Nine times out of 10, it's at the park, and the guy's swinging and missing forever. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's the way it goes. But they called them hit factories. In England, there was a hit factory, and it was called Stock, Aitken and Waterman.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Those guys wrote Never Gonna Give You Up, Rick Astley. I mean, they wrote every single one of those huge hits. It was they produced Dead or Alive, Spin Me Round, all that sort of stuff. These guys, if you signed up, in fact, I got a funny story about that. If you signed up to Stock, Aitken and Waterman, you had a hit. There was only one guy that didn't have a hit. You know who that one guy was?
Who is that?
Edwin Starr. I happened to play for Edwin Starr when I was a young kid. I mean, the guy sang War, for crying out loud, in 25 miles. And, he had hit after hit after hit. He was the one guy who signed to Stock, Aitken and Waterman, and it went horribly wrong, horribly quickly. Yeah, but again, I'm digressing. The thing is with it, these are guaranteed hits. So in a funny way, I don't think they sat down and they said, we're going to use those 4 songs, but it was all formula driven, for sure.
Yeah.
And isn't one last piece of trivia, John, before I hand it over to you. Did you know that Don't Stop Believing, using that 4-chord progression, has sold over 7 million copies? Just that track alone. It's apparently it's the best-selling digital track of the 20th century in the United States.
I wouldn't doubt that. Actually, that sounds low to me, but that I bet you that was a single. I mean, that was one of their biggest hits. Yeah, I mean, obviously Neil Schon and Steve Perry. I mean, you've got some great hit makers there that were. And think about that band; they changed their stripes probably 2 or 3 times through the course of their career. Remember,
they did.
In the original,
yes, sir.
In the earliest days, and this we'll talk a little bit as we go forward. They were originally sort of a pseudo, hard rock, progressive sort of rock band type thing in the Wheel in the Sky and all those great tracks from the 70s.
The guy who sang and wrote that is one of my close friends.
Really?
Robert Fleischman. Yeah, one hit and out. But
please give him my regards. I love that.
Absolutely.
Track.
Yeah, man. I mean that song was a game changer, and Journey then went, all right, time to change. And they turned into this arena rock supernova,
Yeah, and when you think about it, everything that has, let's just start from the 50s forward, okay? Everything was derivative. Again, I don't want to keep using that word because it's kind of a dirty word, but in this business at least. But it was all based on something that was already successful. So in the 50s, you had R&B, and I think about it, this is the equivalent in my mind of going from sail to steamships, right? It's like, what was that moment when they decided? And remember, in the old days, the first steamships had sails because they didn't know if it would work. work or it was going to blow up or something. But that transition of everything in the 1940s was big band. It was even the pop songs had horn sections and big rhythm sections. You know, had 8, 10, 15 people in the band playing behind a singer. And that transition, and I don't want to pin it down to one person, but the first one that I can think of, and I know this because we published one of his most famous songs, is Les Paul. And Les Paul turning in 1952, creating what was a derivative of country and blues and such, and popularizing it. And I know that type of music was existing throughout the South. You know, African Americans were putting that music out all the way through. Blues and all of that, of course, was going on. But to sort of turn that into a pop medium and break that mold of everything has to be 15 people and Frank Sinatra to we can do it with a couple of voices, or one voice and a couple of instruments, and breaking into the marketplace, so to speak, the popular culture marketplace, changed the whole system. And then you go into the 60s and you have folk music sort of popping out there, and everything is sort of coming from there. And then you go into the 70s and it's more progressive and jazzy and or heavy metal and hard rock coming out from Zeppelin and that crowd and Black Sabbath. Then you get into the 80s and you have dance and you have pop, and pop goes to synth pop, and you have all these artificial drum machines and such driving the bus. And then you get to the 90s and you have grunge, which is, thank God it came and went. I don't ever want to hear that. I think that's what killed rock and roll, frankly.
That's funny.
Like the end of rock and roll. It's like, you know what? Nobody wants to hear that anymore. Go take a bath, And
then, that's hilarious.
And then we're into the 2000s, where everything now is just sort of catch as catch can, because once you blew everything up with the internet, anybody can put something out there. And as we've talked about with TikTok and all that, anybody's music can suddenly become the next thing, the next greatest thing. So it's so many different things. Back to what we were originally talking about, is like there can be elements of a song. What is it that gets you excited? What turns you on to a track? And it could be a little element. It could be a bass riff. It could be a guitar riff. It could be anything. But the types of things that Simon Cowell is asking for is, I want big hits. I want sing-alongs. I want things that people can go, wow, I get that right away. And a lot of it these days, in my mind, is lyric-driven. I think lyrics are very, very important these days, because everybody's listening to the story.
What's interesting, John, is that you touched on the 60s. If you used more than 4 chords, you're run out of town anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, it literally was like Bob Dylan, The Byrds, Mamas and the Papas. Every single song had basically the same chords in it. And what made those songs different, the Mamas and the Papas were using 4-part harmonies. So yes, you've only got those 4 chord progressions, but they were going from major. They were messing with major that you should never do. And it was like, oh my word, that is absolutely beautiful. Right. And that was incredibly lyric driven. And that was another part of why those same 4 songs didn't become repetitive day in, day out. Even though you were kind of hearing the same song, the lyrics were telling you something. The lyrics were holding you down. If I sound like an old man, it's because I am.
Welcome to the club.
But it's the truth of the matter. And I just had to quickly look. The Police, So Lonely, that was 4 chords. And I'm just going that over in my head. I'm going, really? And again, here we go. We get into the fact that it's arranged so bloody beautifully.
Right.
You have there is no way that you're going, oh Jesus, 4 chords, here we go again. There is not. You're not feeling that. The arrangement is key with this stuff. Don't stop believing. You would never in a million years, unless you're a theory guy, would sit down and go, there's only 4 chords in that.
Right. Well, theory guys don't listen to Journey, so.
Theory guys don't listen to Music Minds either.
Very good. Yes, after we told them not to go to music school, I think they...
Did we say that? Was I there for that one? Oh, yeah, was you?
At some point. It was way back in the old days. But yes, to your point, absolutely. An arrangement is so critical, especially today, because, again, you're right. You're dealing with a lot of similar sounds and similar progressions and similar note structures and all of that sort of thing. So you really have to do something to make it very, very different. The joke that I have, or it's not a joke, but the thing that always makes me laugh is when you're in the 70s and you have a band like Steely Dan come along, okay? Yeah. Now you're talking about arrangement. I mean, that is all arrangement. That is sitting there with chisel and a piece of marble and saying, this is come down from the mount and this is what thou shalt perform. But what did they do when they first came out, that first album had a lot of very interesting and intricate songs on it, but no great hits. So I'm sure, and I don't know this is a fact, but I'm sure somebody must have said, you got to have a hit, you got to have a hit. And they said, fine, you don't like all of our complicated music, we're going to do something as simple as Do It Again. One chord. One chord and a chorus. And then I'm going to play a really ugly keyboard solo on it. And that's your single. And what did that do? That blew them up, and they became everything. Then at the end of their 70s, the 70s iteration of their career, they did Gaucho. And Gaucho, again, was all of these crazy arrangements and weird songs and everything. And they're like, well, come on. I can see, their executive saying, look, it's disco, kid. You got to do some, or old guy now, you got to do some disco. And they say, fine, we're going to do Glamour Profession. And we're going to do this long, crazy disco track that's just about a drug dealer in L.A., and that's going to be our hit from that record. So it's so interesting just to see how the outside, looks in and say, okay, I am Simon Cowell. Here's my vocalist. They look whatever, they sound whatever, make them a star, give me some hits for them. And, they're pulling in songs left and right. I've been at some of these events where these big songwriters come out of, and they came out of their own bands that were never successful, but they just decided, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to start writing for other people and see what happens. And boom, the next thing you know, they're writing every big hit for Keisha and for whoever else. And it's just, once you turn yourself outward and you say, I have the talent here, not myself necessarily, but the person I'm working with and for, I got to make them a star. It suddenly changes that whole concept of writing from your soul and your heart and all that. And now it's like, I got to make this work.
We've all got to put some food on the table, you know what I mean?
Right.
And eventually the art turns into, this is good, but I can't pay the mortgage. So we've all gone there. I mean, believe me, I've been asked to write songs for people, and it's like, we want it a bit like this, and I'm like, okay, let me go find that. work out those 4 chords,
right?
And then and then it's turn them around. I mean, another song I've just spotted here that's another 4-chord wonder is Natalie Imbruglia. Torn.
Oh, sure.
What?
Yes.
I mean, just an amazing pop song with 4 chords in it. I never knew that.
Huge hit.
I never knew. I just never knew that. It's like, the Cranberries Zombie. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but again, think about that track. That track was rooted in the 90s. That was a definition of what the 90s sounded like. That progression, that downward driving sort of grunt and groan, and the same thing with Steely Dan in the 70s, Radiohead in the 90s. Their first albums are all these weird songs. It's like, we got to have a hit. All right, let's do Creep. Because Creep sounds like, Marcy Playground or something else, Yeah. And we're just going to okay, here's your stupid song. And what did it do? It blew them up, left and right.
I know you're a massive fan of Marcy Playground, right?
Yeah. I had to look up and make sure it wasn't Macy Playground. But Tony, I have to say, I think you're being a little too sophisticated here. There are a lot of hits that are just 2 chords.
Oh.
You don't need 4. You can get rid of those other 2.
Could you pass those 2? Could you pass those 2 on to me, please?
Let me throw some at you. Born in the USA, Bruce Springsteen.
Oh, wow.
Achy Breaky Heart, Billy Ray Cyrus.
Wow.
Jane Says, Jane's Addiction. We all know that one. That's literally just 2 chords.
I love that tune.
But here you think the Beatles, so sophisticated, all this. Paperback Writer and Eleanor Rigby. 2 pretty big songs from them. 2 chords.
2 chords?
2 chords. Think about it. And then my favorite one, Break On Through, The Doors. Okay, their first hit. Wow. So, there are ways that you can, you don't, the chords are there to support you, but if you've got the melody and you've got that mindset of, I want to sing something powerful, the chords will find their way. I mean, just believe me, I am not equating myself to anybody that we've discussed so far, but in my limited and very, very forgettable music writing and composing career, the best track I ever wrote for myself, and again, that's a very low bar, I wrote in 20 minutes, okay? Some of the other songs I wrote, it took me years to write them because I couldn't figure out the second chorus or the second verse or the second verse. I guess I figured out the chorus, but whatever. But the best song I ever wrote, it came from a phrase, and as soon as I sang that phrase, the rest of the song wrote itself, and I literally wrote it in 20 minutes.
And what was the phrase?
Looking for my cigarettes. and something else I swore I wouldn't forget.
I like that.
And bam, that was the rest of the whole song. I had the story of the song. It is a story song, and it was just like, and all of a sudden the melody popped in my head. It was like, oh, bah, 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 bah. And it's like I could sing the entire thing. It was like, as if I had written it 20 years before, you know. So it's that kind of thing. If you can get that right phrase, that right melody, and words to music, that's why copyright is words and melody. It's if you can get the words to work with the right melody, or the right melody to work with the right words, you've got your hit, and the rest of it just fills in the blanks. You know, literally, it's filling in the blanks at that point, because you just need something that's going to properly support your melody and your words. So yeah, to me, 4 chords, 2 chords, 20 chords. Let's not go there. 4 chords, 2 chords. Let's do it, and we're ready to roll.
I couldn't have said that better myself. Good Lord, you've spoken like a true songwriter there, John.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, I'll call it quits there, mate. There's no way I'm gonna beat that last statement. So it's time for me to bow out. Listen, I'd like to say thank you to everybody for listening today. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast on YouTube, and you can catch all the episodes on iHeartRadio, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, InTune Radio, and Stitcher. And for all of you who'd like a little bit more info, just come and check us out at our website, www.musicmindspodcast.com. Till next time, love you, John. See you later, people.
You too, Tony. See you, everybody.